Sorry.
Oh, Adam,
All right.
hello.
The
Nice to
important
see
person
you.
is here.
Yeah.
Alrighty, y'all. Thanks for having
He's
me.
here,
Woody.
guys. Okay. Nah, he's been chilling with me for a while, and I mean we're waiting for you. So, guys, Adam Jackson, he's here. That's the lead class designer.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm actually dying right now. Okay.
No worries.
You have to put on this thing else I didn't hear you. Okay.
There we go. Does this work?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. We were already hanging out like 2 days ago a little bit, like chatting. It was fun.
Yeah. Is this frozen or are we okay?
I just paused it. The chat is going though.
Oh, okay.
So
as long as it works.
You can see that everything here. There's a chat. So.
All right. Awesome. Cool.
Yeah. I guess I was gonna be reacting to chat a bit. We can be very casual about it.
Yeah.
Totally. I didn't bring like a list of 100 questions. So we're just gonna.
I'm here to answer whatever you want, Woody.
I mean, chat if you have anything. Now's the time.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a few minutes early, but I gotta leave a few minutes early for an interview. So I figured I'll just come and crash you. So.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, obviously we were all excited for the announcements yesterday.
Yeah.
And it was like very small teasers basically, and I guess you're gonna hear more later, right?
I'm gonna hear more very soon, so I can't spoil anything until then. But I can give you vague answers to future stuff, and a whole lot of answers to existing or past stuff. So.
Okay, that's good. I mean, okay, one question is like, can you give us like a general direction of like how the new class is gonna like fit into the ecosystem of the other classes? Like, is it like a really like agile, fast one, or like a more like caster thing? Is that something you can talk about?
Nope, that's too much already. But I
okay.
can say, and this is the line I keep giving, is it is something that you've never seen before in a Diablo game, and probably haven't seen before anywhere.
Okay.
So it's very different. It's very cool. I'm a huge fan, but I'm a little biased because I helped make it. But yeah, I'm not gonna tell you archetype though. Like, is it agile? Is it tanky? Is it that kind of stuff? But it is completely new. So you'll have a lot to look forward to, I think.
People saying nice try. I mean, I actually kept it like vague enough. I thought maybe we're gonna hear something, but okay. Yeah, I'm very excited to see the reveal at some point. I heard from some people, like I also met some of the devs, they also didn't let anything slip, but they said like it's gonna be amazing, you're gonna like it, and I'm really excited for it. So, new class coming to, like we have only 5 classes, right? And I guess he intentionally started with like only a few classes.
Yep.
To really really iron them out basically. And can you tell us like how many classes you actually have planned already or working on? Is that like something you can share?
Future stuff, no, I can't.
Okay.
Sadly, that's
okay.
super top secret.
All right. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I can talk a lot about like the decision to make something new, because I know a lot of people want like more existing things.
It would be interesting to
get
hear
a lot
like
of questions about that.
Yeah, like how is the process actually? Like how do you actually like make a class? Like where do you start actually?
Yeah, so the biggest thing, and honestly probably the biggest and toughest decision, is right at the beginning, which is what are we gonna make, right? There's a lot that goes into it because Diablo is kind of a very storied IP game series for us, right? It's been around for a long time. So you kind of always have to balance this. Do we give people more existing stuff, or do we make new stuff, right? And then even when we give them existing stuff, how do we twist it so that it feels new, right? Like when Diablo IV, we bring back a lot of existing classes with different archetypes, right? We brought back a lot of things that people are familiar with, that have been around for a really long time, but try to put some twists on them, make them feel different, right? I think the Rogue is probably our best example of that at launch.
Yeah, I guess the Rogue is probably like, it was a Diablo 1 class.
It was Diablo 1 class, but
Diablo 1 is
very long time ago, right? So it's kind of open-ended. We have a lot of room for interpretation, and we added, we kept the fantasy of, it's got range and bows and things, but also very quick, very agile, a lot of melee moves. Things like Twisting Blades didn't exist in Diablo 1, right?
Yeah.
So
I think Twisting Blades is probably like, I mean, it's also like one of the most popular builds, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's also like the most iconic, like kind of like new skill. I feel like,
Yeah, there was a lot of gameplay attached to it. We actually talked a lot internally about how to make that feel good. It was one of the more interesting, tougher ones, actually. I think the legendary or whatever that makes it spin around you makes it a lot more easy to use. But imagine you didn't have that, and you're just starting with the base skill of like you have to hit something, then run away from it so that it hits other things.
I mean, honestly, that's also really cool. Actually,
it adds a lot of gameplay. But that's the kind of realm we're thinking of. Like, how do we add stuff that's really different, that makes you play and think differently, but is also good?
I have a question for that. So, have you actually considered making some kind of like exclusive skill effects? Like, for example, there is like this version of Twisting Blades with the spinning blades, and there's like maybe something that you cannot use together with that. but it's like a separate version of like another legendary that would have alter the skill, for example.
Yeah.
So that, for example, it could open up such a, like, back and forth, like, running playstyle. Like, for example, when I play the twisting blades, I actually kind of like it when I don't have the spinning blades. I like it with it too, but it's like a very different feel.
It is a very different feel. Right?
Yes.
So, absolutely, that is kind of how we thought about skills initially. You know, when we're first making skills, we don't have all the legendaries and uniques made, right? We're trying to come up with, like, what is a fun way to use and make a skill baseline, and how does it feel? And then we add more and more on top of it, and then even we were open to the idea during development, a lot of like the twisting blade or the spinning blades of like, hey, it completely changed it to something different, right? One thing that's a little tougher for us though, even speaking of the spinning blades, is like, I would say normal twisting blades is actually harder to use than the spinning blades, kind of obviously, right? Because the normal one, you only have the return to use, so you have to think about your positioning, do all this, 4D chess in your head.
Yeah.
And the spinning ones, they just kind of spin around you and you kill everything, right?
Yeah, it
Ball
does
lightning has a
does make
similar
more
effect, right?
Yeah, it makes it more approachable.
Makes it more approachable. And so one thing that's we kind of struggle with, and this is true not just for Diablo, but any game, is like when you add a modification that makes it more approachable, but if it also makes it stronger, then you've really just kind of made the skill easier to use and better, and that's kind of the real version now.
That's exactly what I mean. Like, for example, now we have Dolmen Stone for the druids with like the spinning boulders, and that basically opens up a whole new build. And yeah, I think before boulder is kind of like a meme, I guess, and now it's actually a build. But it would be interesting to see if there was like a third version of boulder or like a third version of twisting blades.
Yeah, I'd say I'm totally open to that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a matter of first getting the
like
second version for every skill.
Yeah, exactly.
So we don't give like one skill all the love and then not anything else,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
But very open to the idea. Yeah, it's something that we're jazzed about doing. I think it's design space that we'll explore forevermore. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I don't know like how you approach, like, for example, the expansion design. Like, I'm sure you're gonna add like more skills, for example, for classes also as well. I see does that happen in like Diablo 3, like, or in Diablo 2, right? There were new skills added for existing classes. I guess you're gonna see something like that as well. But have you also considered, for example, expanding the skill trees, like the number of upgrades, or like the depth of upgrades? Is that something you're looking into?
Yeah, I'll say it's nothing to announce, but it is absolutely something that we've thought about. We actually went through a lot of iteration of the existing skill tree, even to get where we are. Kind of what I alluded to earlier, like we always fight with ourselves. I think we will forever, by the way. Not new to Diablo, but like balancing complexity and depth and making sure that the game, especially for Diablo 4, we want it to be approachable for people that have never played a Diablo game, but also has a lot of meat for people like you that have played a lot of old Diablo games or have just a lot of experience in the RPG space, right? So the skill tree actually went through, even up until release, like a lot of iteration where we had a lot of different versions of more complex, more simple, how do we get the depth but keeping it very approachable. We went through a lot of UI work to make it very, especially when you're like level 1, like choosing those first few skills and upgrades, very easy to understand. Like, these are the fantasies I'm chasing for my class, and then these are the upgrades. Don't die. But you're hardcore right now, right?
Yeah.
You got to be a lot more careful than me. I got to keep an eye on this too.
I almost ripped my rogue actually on the first run because it was a kind of scuffed setup and stuff.
Like, yeah, this is different from macros. We're like, oh wait, you got to really be careful.
Yeah.
But
okay, someone is asking, did you actually kill Lilith with your level 100?
Not yet. I was playing yesterday. Then I had to get ready for stuff today. We have a lot of like rehearsals and practice and things to get ready for BlizzCon, so I didn't get that much time. But I just hit 100 a couple days ago. Haven't done her yet. I'm also doing her, I guess you'd call it an ethical build, I think is what you say when you do it. So I'm not doing any one-shots, nothing like that. I'm playing a Berserking Upheaval Barb. So I'm taking the Berserking key passive.
Out of Unconstrained, you mean?
Yeah, no overpower whatsoever.
Sounds ethical enough for Lilith. Yeah.
No, something enough. So it's a real fight, and it's pretty fun. I love the fight. I think it's crazy fun.
Me too. Yeah.
There's some rough edges that I talk about with the team sometimes, but I think it's really well designed and really fun. So
yeah, that's cool.
Still working on it. I got to the very end of phase 2, where you're on the one little platform and she like covers all but the little strip.
Yeah.
I thought I was in the little strip and then I wasn't and I died. I'm like, I was like right there.
Okay. Oh, you get it.
We'll get it.
Yeah, I see like some question in chat, guys. So obviously Adam can't spoil like really crazy details about the expansions or something like that.
Yeah, you can try. I'm trying. I feel bad because I'm gonna be mean. Like no. And
also like about the season 2 stuff and the season 3 stuff. I guess you're gonna hear a lot more later.
Gonna hear more later, more details. Yep.
The campfire is like, I think, an hour or two after my stream, guys.
Yeah, it's like right after. So unfortunately, you're like right at the edge of. I can't say the season 2 stuff in big
Should
detail.
have delayed the stream a little bit more.
But I can talk a lot about the past or design or class or balance design pillars or how we think about that kind of stuff. I'm very open.
Rax is here. Ask about SSF. Can you say anything about SSF? I guess it's probably more a question for Shelly or so.
Yeah, I think that's
I'm
higher up
checking
than me.
If you're involved with that.
Not involved in the decision making related to that. I know there's a desire for it. I could say that, but
yeah, I'm pretty sure
no
that they're
plans
aware.
for it.
And
yeah,
let's see, maybe. I mean, someone else had Shelly interview. Maybe they actually said something about it. I
think somebody else does have him on the stream today. So
yeah, so maybe we'll hear something there, or maybe. I mean, there's going to be the campfire, and everyone will take questions again, right?
They are going to be taking questions.
Yeah,
there,
maybe we're
so
going to hear something there.
They're taking community questions there.
Yeah. But hi Rex, by the way.
Yeah, hi Rex. Yeah, good to see you. I'm sad you're not here. I would have loved to have met you in person, but
yeah, where are you, man? Okay. Yeah. In any case, can you tell us more about like how do you approach like seasonal design of classes?
Yeah.
Like, for
totally.
example,
I can talk a lot about that.
How to make new builds, new items like the Dome and Stone. Like how do you feel about the meta, for example? And these kind of things. So that would be
I could go a very long time, but I'll just answer anything specific and go off on my own tangents. So I guess we'll start with the meta, like right now, because that's a good starting point for a lot of conversations, I think, right? So the meta right now, as far as I see it, and I think a little bit of the team is, we went to Season 2, or I'll give a little history lesson. I like giving history lessons. I'm a teacher naturally. If you didn't know, I used to teach martial arts before I did anything at Blizzard, so I love to teach and talk.
This is how the rogue turned out that way.
Yeah, very much. I love combat. I love, all that kind of stuff. Love playing fighting games and combat-related stuff. So coming into Season 2, we were really nervous because, as you know, we updated like all the combat math of the game, right? We updated crit, vuln, resistances.
Yeah, that was a huge
tuning of all the monsters, tuning of the players, like everything, right?
Yeah.
Added new scaling, so like there's just a lot going on. So we knew like getting into the weeds of that much upheaval of stats and things that there's a high chance that we could miss somewhere, right? So we had kind of goals and pillars of what do we want the game to actually feel like, and that's where we start with like a lot of our conversations. And some decisions that we came to was one, and I think we hit this, is we wanted most of or pretty much all of the game to be able to be completed by pretty much any main build that a class has, like main fantasy. And what I mean by main fantasy is like, let's take the
like
Druid,
Blood
for example.
Necro,
Yeah, like
Bone Necro.
Blood Necro, Bone Necro, Shadow
okay.
Necro, Army Necro, right? Like that. Like everything in the game should be able to be done. Now, it will be easy on some more than others because there's different power levels of classes and builds, as you know. But it should be done, and I think we nailed that. The part that is forever difficult that I don't know we'll ever completely nail is like the power level difference between classes, right? Like in our minds, in a perfect world, we would want like all classes to be within a barrier. Like everything's within here. It's okay if like one build is here and one build is here, but if the game difficulty is like here in the middle or closer to here, that's fine. But what we end up with is a lot of things are here, and then some things that Woody figures out are here, right? And we've got like, the Lightning Stork and Hodavarb and some versions of Upheaval and Deathblow and some other things that I'm sure I don't even know yet.
I guess like one big reason why the buffs are so crazy right now is because of the overpower synergies that actually do something now, and we're unchanged.
I will say, one of my balance designers, one of the ones that did a lot of the overpower rework, came to us and was like, hey, I think overpower is going to be really good. And we're like, you know what?
Yeah.
It's never been really good yet. Ship it. We'll figure it out. We try to balance it, of course, but, it's okay if we're off.
Like one passive point, 15% damage. I mean, it's pretty good.
Pretty good. That's why I said I'm not doing overpower. I knew. But, so, some builds end up, and it's really hard because Diablo is a very multiplicative game by nature. Yeah, that one. So
one of the examples there.
Yeah. So when we're off by a certain amount, like I came from Heroes of the Storm when I worked on this. So I did a lot of live service type of games, like live updates, balance, and stuff like that. And in those games and many others, like when you're off, you're usually off by like imagine in normal Heroes 1 and a really good Heroes like 1.2, maybe 1.3 if we're really off. In Diablo, that's like another day in the office of being off by 1.2. You're usually off by like 5 or something, right? Like the multipliers, because you'll be off in one place by 10% here, and then 20% there, and 30% somewhere here, and then when you mix it all, it goes to like 300%.
Yeah, I think actually like the overall design of the game is like it's like structured in a way that things don't like run really out of control
We
because
tried. We
yeah.
actually overhauled the combat math a couple times
Yeah, but
related to this.
I mean, also
to
like for
try and
example,
do
like
that.
with the number of offensive aspects you can have on a build, and
Yep.
the stats.
We do have limitations, yeah.
Exactly. So it kind of evens out no matter what kind of build you're doing. But I mean, now for example, you started adding like very offensive armor uniques, and
Yep.
you have like more multipliers that way, and okay, you have to kind of choose which ones you're gonna take, but people are gonna try to cram them all in, right?
They always want to cram in, one shot's what everybody wants to do. So they always try to do that. No matter what we make, they're gonna try and do that, right? Which I don't blame them. That's fun. It's cool.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is how it works, I guess. So
yeah.
It's kind of. Yeah, you're kind of shifting to this like typical like defensive item to like an offensive slot, basically like this one here.
Yep, I'm wearing that one too.
Exactly, it's a good item, but on the other hand, yeah, I guess there's also still reasons to run normal items. So as long as there's like enough balance, it's fine, I guess.
Enough, it's hard. Yeah, I would say one thing that I've kind of learned coming from like a PvP game like Heroes to something like Diablo 2 or Diablo 4.
I'm gonna scroll a bit because there are some questions.
Oh yeah, totally. I can.
Oh, by the way, someone here highlights that the game is awesome right now. Keep the good work.
I love it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. Tile asks, how is accessibility design integrated in the seasonal design? Do you know something about that?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you mean by accessibility. Like, there's
that's
a very ambiguous word. It can mean like specifically like like people that want to use different formats of playing the game, or if you're disabled, or you talk about like just general like casual versus competitive. So I don't know exactly what they mean by that, but I'll just take a stab and talk about just like making sure that the content's kind of available to everybody. And that's kind of a little bit what I alluded to earlier of like, our main goal was like everything should be done by everyone. And we do try and make the game in such a way. And we do this also from like controls and other standards of we want this to be, we go really wide with Diablo of trying to get a lot of people that they can play. You don't have to be an expert like you or familiar with games a lot to be able to not only get in, but also to do well or moderately well.
It's important that, people can actually get somewhere, right?
It is.
They don't necessarily have to like beat the hardest challenge in the game or something, but as long as they they get through the game, they can see the stuff, that's good, right? So
like one of our core balance pillars we had. It was actually the very first pillar that we made. That I have everyone that joins our team, they have to watch this presentation I made about it. And the very first one is called the pillar was accessibility through the campaign, and that was the idea. It was more applied when we launched, but we have this new campaign. A ton of people are going to come in that have never played a Diablo game or an ARPG before. We need to make sure that there is a way that they can get through that is intuitive, that all of them can get through it. Because it would be crushing. Imagine that you're like trying to get into a new genre and like you can't even beat the main story. Like that'd be terrible experience, right? So that's why we have like the 2 difficulty modes there.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
One that's veteran for people like you and I that played a lot, and then something for someone that's never done it before. And that's why we revamped the skill tree so many times. Same thing of like your first choices are very limited and you're just picking a fantasy. And that's kind of why. Like we do think about that a lot. Of course, something that's more interesting as I talk about a lot with the team, like the life cycle of a game, is that you start off kind of there of like you want to grab a lot of people, make it very accessible, and then the needs of your player base change over time. And we're already seeing that with Season 2 with like Diablo IV, where, and our goal of Season 2 of making the game accessible, like every build can beat like Uber Lilith. It's possible, right? Yeah. But of course, the downside of that, the flip side of that is like, oh, I've done it, now what? I'm bored. Exactly. I need something. Give me something to do now, right?
Yeah, the Diablo 12
is basically
come in exactly there, right?
Huh?
Diablo 12 is going to come in exactly there. Like
that exactly. That is a targeted
one
thing of a need we know of like, hey, people like you that play a ton and streamers or even just really hardcore people that want to challenge themselves. We know that you need something to use this gear against. I talk about this all the time with the systems team and other people like, hey, I really don't want to fall off this game because I get all this cool stuff and I have nothing to actually challenge myself with. I am that player too, very much so.
Yeah, it's a bit of an issue right now, but I'm really glad that something is coming there.
It's aware on the radar, and we're working on more stuff like that. Because
and I mean, we're just in Season 2, so like the game is fresh and. Yeah, okay, of course, people that blast like 200 hours and they're like
people love the blast. Something I learned just how much you all freaking love to blast.
You're gonna get through it, right? But okay, we actually had a good question here.
Sure, totally. Sorry, I love to talk a lot.
Yeah, okay. So was there at some point of development a situation where weapon types were more open among classes? And if so, what caused the decision to make them constrained into specific classes?
Yeah, trying to think. When I joined the team a little bit later on, like a couple years before we released, and they had already decided the weapon types that were limited. So I actually can't give a great answer to that question to be someone that maybe knows more about the history of when the classes were originally stood up. I do know that a lot of the ways that we constrain things generally isn't because we like just constraint, but it's for two reasons. The first is some usually fantasy driven, of like we want you to feel like a specific thing, and so having stuff equipped, having skills of that type, having things like that um, matters a lot, particularly when you launch the game. Again, kind of that accessibility thing, but like when we
Yeah,
launch, it's
I
very
guess.
important that the classes feel different from one another, and that means
Yeah,
that they have to be more constrained in a box.
yeah,
You know, Barbarian needs to feel like Barbarian, very physical. Not a ton of elemental stuff going on, charging, kicking, you know, things like that. And then Sorcerer, you've got the elements, but they, you know, Sorcerers don't have access to Shadow, for example. Um, and you know, as the game goes on, I think we can flex a little more on that because you know, go into this like the life cycle of a game. When you launch, it's very important to be a little bit more rigid so that people can understand the fantasies they're chasing and the builds they're chasing and be a little more clear.
yeah.
This is actually where the idea of the key passives came in. We had a lot of debate about that. I remember internally, like, do we want to have key passives? I'm actually one of the ones that really pushed for it, and that's why it's in, is because it was important to the team that we had like a North Star for players to see of like, you log in, I want to be a werewolf. I see the key passive there, and it says like, hey, your attack speed turns into crit. That's basically what it says. And they're like, oh, I like attack speed, and I like crit. Now I have like stats I think I know I care about. I have things I'm going towards, and I have a fantasy
Yeah.
of like, hey, there's a werewolf build and things in there that I can do.
Yeah, I think the key
And
passes do a pretty good job at giving you like, some direction, basically. Of
they
the build,
do.
right?
There's a downside to this, though, is that the more direction you give, the more you funnel players into that. And that's kind of the impetus of that weapons question. Same idea of like,
Yeah.
when we don't let everyone use everything, we are kind of telling you, hey, you got to use this thing.
Yeah.
So we're always pushing and pulling
So
in that, right?
We
Of
just
like,
need like some extra key passes on a barb, you know, like one for bare fists and one for a shield. And
I'm down to add more. The big thing about D4 is that the launch version is our foundation, and we're very willing to
yeah.
add more, rework, reinvent, you
Yeah,
know,
I think the cool
react
part,
to things.
yeah, the really cool part about key passes is that if you ever add more, like on their own, they can already create like 5 new builds or something.
Yep.
So that's a really cool part with just like that one extra choice.
We
that
tried
you-
a lot to keep them open-ended because
Yeah.
that is something we go in that we struggle with. Is like if we make it too targeted, then that's the only thing you're going to care about, and if they're too powerful, that's the only thing you care about. So there's a balance there.
Yeah.
That can be tough to hit, but yeah, those are our goals.
Okay. There's a question. Do they plan to make more items that totally change the playstyle, like the Hurricane Boulder thing?
Yeah, I love those items. Of course, absolutely.
Yeah. I would actually expect that
it's-
as well. You know, like you kind of like have like all base builds, and then like there's like maybe more end game stuff, and that you unlock like Dolmen Stone or in a similar fashion. I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. We love making that kind of stuff.
Can
It's
we
a
get
matter
like,
of like
can we get like a spinning grenade tornado?
just a bunch of grenades blowing up around you. I mean, well, I'm down. The rule of cool. I forget who said that, but yeah, you know, if something's cool, we want to do it. Yeah, I'm very open to doing that. It's a matter of like, you know,
People like spinning things, you know.
yeah. That's another thing though. Is that like how long can we get away with spinning stuff before it starts to become samey and boring, right?
I mean, that's a little small as
It's-
well,
it's-
right?
We're good right now, but
Yeah.
I'm aware that I'm a big fan of like adding more vectors of damage and interesting things. I'm not a fan of like when everything's like a circular AOE or only a skill shot line. Like I'm motivated to make new vectors of damage delivery, I guess is a good way to put it, right? Like
Yeah.
more interesting
maybe,
things.
Yeah, maybe you should take another look at Eaglehorn, though. You know, just saying.
We could take another look. I look at these things a lot, so.
Okay, but yeah. I mean, there's like lots of options. I think. Like,
I think so. Oh, yeah, no, the sky's the limit. The only limit is our imagination, and then even the player's imagination, because you all give us feedback all the time. And he's like, yeah, that sounds cool. Let's do it. Like, that's easy.
okay, how do you go about actually like deciding, for example, between legendaries and uniques? Like, where do the uniques exactly come in versus okay, we want this to be a legendary power that is more accessible? Like, is it
Yeah,
like
like what's a legendary, what's a unique power type of
Yeah,
thing?
exactly.
Yeah, so goes back a little bit to talking about limitations. This is kind of an advantage of having some limitations on things, is that uniques have some unique or special limitations that other items don't, right? Their affixes are fixed. They cannot be anything else than what they are. They can only go on a certain slot. And what that means is that even though it sounds constraining, it actually opens up our design space and creativity.
Yeah, I
'cause
can
it
see that with
gives us
druids,
the
for
ability
example,
to give
right?
you stuff that
Yeah.
we know isn't going to mess with other stuff in a specific way.
Yeah,
And that
exactly.
means we can make it stronger or more crazy. As an example,
Yeah, the druids, I think, is the best example. Yeah.
yeah, Druid's a good
The
example
helms
of
or the
this.
chests,
Yeah, where we can make exclusive things, and because we know that they're exclusive, we don't have to worry about those powers mixing together, and that means we can make them really crazy or really special on their own, or make things that couldn't mix otherwise, right?
Yes. Yeah, I mean I can definitely see that point. But outside of like the mixing and matching, is there like any other like decision making that goes into that? Like,
Yeah,
okay,
there.
this is going to be a unique power now, and
Yeah, generally,
sometimes I feel
yeah.
like, okay, this could be a legendary too, and I'm like, yeah,
Yeah, so I'll go through a little bit of a history lesson with you, I guess, on uniques, because that's a good point. So when we originally designed uniques, we actually didn't design them with the goal of them being stronger than legendary powers. We actually very specifically did not want to do that. And actually, future Adam is going to have a problem now that we had a decision to go back and make them really cool and powerful. And I can explain that a little bit. So, um, yeah, originally uniques we meant to have them to have slot restrictions, but their power level was actually the budget that we had was about the same as a legendary. And the reason why we did that was we were afraid that if we make uniques way more strong, then everyone is only going to want uniques now, and legendaries are going to fall off, and then every build is going to be like, all your slots are
yeah,
uniques,
a
and
list
and
of
then we all
uniques.
look the same. Because
Yeah.
right now that's not really a problem because like I'll use Fireball Sork as
I
an
mean,
example.
we're kind of getting there, honestly, right?
This is what I get at is that like you have two Fireball uniques, right? That specifically talk to Fireball. You've got the 3-shot and the bouncing. But imagine 5 years from now, we have to think ahead because we're game developers. But imagine we have like 10 Fireball uniques down the line, and now you can mix all of them, and now every Fireball Sork is literally exactly the same, and they can't even manipulate their stats if we
Yeah,
keep it that
or
way.
you make like more gloves for a fireball, right?
Exactly.
So
Or
instead
this
of
is
the
the advantage
bouncer-
of it. It's
yeah.
like, oh, they're all gloves. And then it's like you
Yeah,
get like
exactly.
5 different fireball gloves. It's a little silly,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
we
And
can
this is
live with
how-
that.
This
but
is how you can like diversify, even a single skill, right? With like
Mhm.
completely different behavior. Like the fireball gloves, like if you play a fireball sork, you have to play the gloves. And
Yep, and
know,
that's just kind of what it is. And that is our short-term answer to this problem. That's why I don't think we're completely there yet. But now that we've decided to make uniques really strong, that is going to be a future us problem. And even like you said a little bit now, we're like, hey, because uniques have a higher power budget, all the slots you can get them in, if it makes sense for your build, you probably want it, unless the legendary has some synergy that is kind of different that you just really want or need, right? So legendaries are a lot more malleable, and we know that. You can move them around different slots. They can have different stats as well, so you could get like all the best in slot stats that you want, whereas a unique maybe not.
yeah.
That's also why we kind of targeted stats as a place to make unique items feel really unique. We can give you things that don't exist.
Yeah, I think
But sometimes you want the things that do exist in a legendary power. Like maybe 4 best in slot things that are normal for that slot is actually better than the wacky thing we put there. Right?
yeah, what I actually like about the uniques, like this is actually a good example here. So because this is a very powerful item.
Yep.
But it has
Potion capacity.
it has
Yep.
at least 2 stats that no one wants.
Yep.
And in some cases free. And it has 1 good stat. Yeah, but it's still an item that everybody
Yep.
wants. And that's kind of cool part about it, because
That's by design.
yeah, exactly, because you can have like a really powerful effect that people really want, but it's like these trash stats. But these are stats that still you can feel them, right?
They give you power. I mean, like potion
feel
capacity
potion.
is convenient.
Yeah, I would
right?
never
Like,
roll it myself, but I am forced to have it here, and I like it. I like having it, but I would never use it otherwise.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the cool thing about uniques, I believe, where
I agree, and I'm
you're
a fan of that
forced to
part
have
of
a certain
too.
thing, like.
And we kind of give you problems to deal with of like, oh, if you have less defensives because you took this offensive thing here, now you got to get it somewhere else. So now how do I put together the puzzle piece? And that was kind of our intent with uniques.
You'd like a belt slot. Have you actually thought about like adding more slots? Like
Slots for what? Inventory,
equipment.
build,
Belts
equipment
or
slots.
like,
I'll say nothing to announce now. Haven't thought about it a ton. We have a little bit, but like it's scary because things like extra slots or like extra skills on your bar, for example, people are talking a lot about that at launch. Of like, I want an ultimate only button. Like we can do those things technically, but like they're really scary when it messes with the power budget of everything, the complexity of everything. Like they're more foundational changes that I think you could see someday probably, but it's a bigger deal than I think a lot of people think sometimes. And it can be a little bit more risky, but definitely not off the table, I would say.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I also heard exactly these comments about the ultimate ability button and stuff like that. But on the other hand, there's also so many builds that just don't have an ultimate, and I think this is like it's cool that there's a choice. So at least personally, I'm kind of on board with that.
Yeah.
And I would not really want to feel like forced into having an ultimate necessarily.
Yeah,
so
that's the thing, and we talk about this a lot of like.
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that people want, but they don't realize that when we give it to you, we will, if it's good, we're going to force you now to learn how to use it and play with it. And now you have to optimize, and that makes the game more complicated for everybody.
Is the team actually
So-
like happy with like how generally like people make builds? Like, is this what you envisioned? Like, okay, we have like one core skill, that's your main ability. You put it in a bunch of supporting stuff. You have triple shouts or not, or you know, like how did you actually envision this? Like, for example, basic versus core skills versus
Yeah.
maybe having a second core skill. You know, there's like some rogue builds, for example, there's Flurry RF or Pen Shot RF. And is that something that you envision to be that way or some other way?
Generally, I'd say it fit our vision. Our goal was that most builds would follow a certain path, and then people can deviate once they get legendaries and uniques and get late game, and also as they get more creative. Like, I'm totally down, for example, for builds that don't have any basic skill, or builds that make the basic skill their main way of doing damage, or you know, other similar, or 2 core skills. Like, I love that creativity. We definitely made the game with that in mind.
Yeah, I remember like very early on, like we had these gameplay trailers or like the Rogue class trailer, and you know in the trailer they actually showed off like 4 different core skills in one clip, right? There was like Rapid Fire there, some Twisting Blades there, some Flurry there, but I mean this is not how the game is played.
Yeah, that was
But,
early on. We've changed a lot of our philosophies as we got through the game.
but
Yeah,
on
as
the
we
other
ironed
hand,
out things.
I think we talked about this at another point sometime. Like for example, like the Sork problem with all the defensive skills. It's like, okay, like you have this one main skill and then you have like defense, 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 defense.
Yeah,
because
and I
it's
was
just-
going to get to that part like you're alluding to of like
Yeah.
most things I'm very happy with. The part where I think we get a little more grumpy maybe is like when the only way to play every build, you have to have multiple slots be the same thing. And I think that's a little less healthy for the game, right? Like, you know, like you mentioned, 3 defensive skills on the Sork or 3 shout skills for the Barb, where like if it has too much representation, where like all the builds, no matter what like key passive or what fantasy you're chasing, they all
Someone
do
is
it.
asking about it right now. If you're planning to change the most boring Bob triple shout meta.
Yeah.
Well, guys,
So-
I got good news for you. I changed it already. Just
Yeah, see, you're not running triple
type
shout, it's
exclamation mark
fine.
build.
Yeah.
Okay.
To be fair, I ran 2 shouts for 99% of the game, so you know it's fine. But yeah, it's the shout one's dicey because the thing too is that like we're careful about if we want to change something like triple defensive or triple shout, of doing it in a way where people that like that don't feel like we just like slap them like, no, don't do that. We don't like it, right? Like we don't want to make it impossible or really bad. We just want to make it not optimal in every situation, right? I'll tell you my suspicions. I don't have complete answers yet, but like because they're very hard problems actually to solve. Because the thing about defensives and shouts is that they're only cooldown based, so they don't cost your main resource. They give you some type of utility that's very desirable, usually defensives and things like that's how you get through your dungeons, right? And they're also highly synergistic with one another. Like triple shout, we put in a lot of things in the skill tree. If I could go back, I'd probably do a little differently. Of like, you know, there's a lot of things in Paragon skill tree and legendaries that say all your shouts get this benefit, or when you cast any shout, get this benefit. And that naturally tells you as a player, well,
Use
I
all the
get way
shouts,
more benefit to use all of them rather than
Yeah.
just one. And if I could go back and do it again, I would have like targeted one so that, you know, like your fantasy, if you want to be a challenging sharp bout,
I mean,
shout
this can still be an
bard.
option, right? You can literally have like an effect that says if you have only one shout active, then do that. or
Correct,
whatever,
and that's
right?
kind of like the realm that we're probably going to explore to solve those problems. But we need to be careful of how we do it. I feel like no matter what, there will be a little bit of pain, which I never like to do, but we'll see. We're still figuring out. You know, we talk about it a lot. It's a
I
tough
mean, you
problem
don't have to
solve.
like completely kill the other options, right? So
Yeah.
That's also good.
So that's how we think about it.
yeah, but have you also considered like some synergies to add, for example, for like we have double core skill builds, but what about like quadruple core skill builds or something? Like like
I think it's cool. Yeah.
like a full like
Yes.
martial arts kind of like press all the buttons and in the right moment, it just feels like you always have this like one main skill and that's it, and it would be really cool to actually have.
Yeah,
like,
motivating you to have more core skills, I definitely think is and I think that's actually a more interesting puzzle to solve because like unlike defensives and shouts in these like I'm not gonna call them free because they have cooldowns but pretty close to it. Like managing multiple spenders presents a more unique problem where you have to now think about your resource a lot more. And I like those types of options where we give you a puzzle to solve and then reward you for solving the puzzle very heavily. And multiple core skills kind of does that naturally because now you're like, oh, I have to get a lot of my resource and manage it in a different way where I can like bounce between them. or
Yeah,
whatever,
exactly.
right?
I guess it's
And
like,
that's kind of cool.
like for something like that, it's like always important to have like these very strong synergies that buff like multiple things at once, right? So for example, Grass of Shadow. I don't want to say it's a good item, but it gives you ranks to all core skills. So that's like kind of like the stuff that you're looking for, right? Instead of having like 4 individual rolls on a glove or something like that. you need these kind of things that actually work for multiple things at once, so that you actually have scaling.
Yeah, very much by design, that
But,
one. And we do kind of, sometimes we put little nuggets of things, and like maybe it doesn't work now, but if we make something in the future, there's like we talk a lot about builds
Yeah, I
and
know
things
you're
like
trying
Lego
very
pieces.
hard with the grenades.
We're trying. We really want people to do it. It's gonna be good, trust me.
Okay, I'm
But
excited to see the ring actually for Rogues. I wonder if that's going to be a grenade one or if it's going to be improvement or what.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, we'll
There
see.
is
I guess
something.
you're going to see them all later, right?
Yep, you will see all of those later. So
Okay,
you'll get
yeah.
to see what all the rings do.
Yeah, I'm excited for
can't
those.
say Yeah.
Okay, let me check
Yeah, totally.
the chat ability. What else you got? Is there a chance of permanently keeping extracted aspects? Someone is asking.
Permanently keeping them. So
I guess for like
you could keep plugging them into other places. I would say we've heard the feedback and we're aware of what people want to do there.
All right. Okay. In general, like, how do you feel about some builds that are like really overperforming, either by accident or by bugs or whatever, or like that's just like exceeded your expectations?
Yeah.
Like, what is your like general like idea about how to handle this?
Yeah, I would say this is one of those areas that even like since launching the game in Season 1, we've kind of had some growth and learnings from. So.
Yeah, I remember like when launch happened, and then day 2, like mobs were like mega nerfed, and like the Ghost there was taking
We hit almost
grasp
every class, I think. It's a blur
it
now.
was like
There was every other day someone would link me something like, hey, Woody did this. Hey, somebody else did this. Hey, somebody did this. It's like, really, again? Okay. So one thing that we kind of learned is that, so actually, yeah, we'll go back to that, the history lesson. Like
22 common points is fine. I agree with that, by the way.
yeah, fine. 22. Good number of combo points to have, yeah. So when we launched the game, we had this idea that we wanted the builds. Of course, we want the builds to be within this realm, right? And anything that came out, we really wanted to get back in because we had this like pinnacle Uber Lilith content that we wanted to like be a brand of kind of the fights we could design and how hard the game could be and the ways you would overcome it, right? And then, of course, we got bugged builds or even just oversights because, again, like I said before, it's very easy to be off by a lot of power in this game because there's so many multiplicative inputs. And I could get into a whole other speech of why we have it that way and why it's good for the game, but we'll do that later. But yeah, so things crop up that are like really, really crazy good, right? And so how do we feel about it? At first, we really wanted to bring things in line so that everything's in this realm that is really healthy and has a good ecosystem where you feel like there's a lot of builds and you don't always want to play the same one. A natural thing for, I think, a developer and a player to want, right? But then we found that after we...
It's still like a very dangerous thing now. For example, we're talking about ball lightning. Like people have been playing ball lightning now for a few weeks, and this is like the thing, and everyone likes it. Like people like it, right?
Yeah.
And of course, it's like so powerful that when I want to start a Sorg this season, I wasn't planning to really play ball lightning.
There's a lot of gravitational pull to say, hey, play ball lightning.
Literally gravitational pull for ball lightning. Yeah, and it's like, should I really try not playing a ball lightning Sorg? This is like,
And this is the downside of leaving it in forever, right? So this is kind of where we're at now, is that like, so at first we're like, okay, we want to fix it because it makes sense to. But then we learned like people got really unhappy because like, and I see it from the player point of view, like every time we find something cool, bad guy Adam just nerfs it again. Like, that's not how you want, like,
I thought it's
your
like bad guy Joe Pipora.
Yeah, or bad guy Joe, bad guy. Well, there's a lot of Joes, a lot of Adams. Take your pick.
Does Joe Pipora actually have like like a physical like Nerf bat or somewhere in his office or something? I could imagine actually.
He might, not anymore. I'll tell you that. But
you need to gift him one.
But yeah, so we started there, and it wasn't working very well. So then we kind of were like, okay, we're gonna stop for a bit and be hands off, and we let things go through. But of course, we knew this would happen. But like, if you leave things in for too long, then people start to question. First of all, like, is it a bug or is it intended? You can't tell if Blizzard leaves it in forever. And then two, like, it dominates. If it dominates them enough for too long, you don't feel that shift, and you feel like, oh, every build's kind of the same. There's no point in experimentation because we already know it's the best because it's so much better than everything else. Neither of those things are healthy for the long-term health of the game, right? I think Bulwark Druid's an example of that. Like, it was in for a really long time, and then we had to fix it. But it's like, doesn't feel good for the people that really like things. They thought it was okay, and then we take it away. That's not great either. So we're kind of taking a more balanced approach now.
Are you actually thinking about, for example, bringing back something like a Bulwark Druid, or like giving us some actual scaling that is like not bugged, for example?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think I talked about this a couple campfire chats ago, but I want to bring scaling to things that don't scale well. That's one of those low-hanging fruits that I think will just make the game better. No promises when or if, but it is something that I want to do. There's a lot of things that don't scale well, a lot of legendary powers. I think ultimates in general don't scale too well, or a lot of them don't. I want to add more ways to have these things scale so that you just have more options, more builds, things that are good. But yeah, so now we're in Season 2, and there are some things that are really good, right? And our idea now is that we don't want to, or when we nerf things, because I think we can't just not nerf things forever. Because in that world, you have like everything in this realm, and then you've got like, you know, your Hoda, Barb, or Ball Line, that goes here, and if we're like, okay, whether or not it's bugged, if we just bring everything here, then the next thing goes here, and you just get like, you know, quadrillions of damage. You can't do that for a long time.
Then we're in Diablo 3 Season 25.
Yeah, right. Or like you can't measure it anymore, and that's not a healthy way to do things. So we do have to, but I think it's about how we do it and when. So the way that we think about it now is when we find stuff that's crazy, we're going to be more upfront about it earlier on with the community. Like, hey, this is what's coming and how we see it and what we're planning to nerf. You know, we did this a little bit with like ossified essence on the Necro. If you remember, I said like, hey, that key passive is my oversight. It was just way too strong. Like, we didn't think that essence was going to get as high as it did and that people were going to be able to maximize it the way that they did. It was just an oversight. So we're going to nerf it, and then we did. And you didn't see a huge outcry because as long as other things are viable and the thing that we nerf is viable, I think it's fine. It's when we like totally gut something and kill it, or when we do it over and over and don't say anything beforehand and people get caught off guard, that I think there's bad feelings. So we want to communicate early and often, and then, you know, we'll bring down the power levels of things or change things around. So that way it's more of a conversation. I also think this is really good because, like, I think at launch, and even in general, this is something I'm passionate about. That's why I'm here talking to you. But I like talking to the community and being more open about things because it arms even you or the community to talk about the changes and things they want to see in the game, and they're armed with the knowledge of how we see it and what we think, right? Because normally, you know, you've got like the community over here and the developers over here, and sometimes I've seen this happen in other communities and games and even our games where like the community starts to just talk with each other and they think this one thing's like a really good idea and they're like, oh, this must be the way to fix it. And then same thing with the developer, like over here, like this must be the way to fix it, and they don't match. And then we do something, and they're like, that was not even at all what we convinced ourselves was a good idea. And sometimes either side can convince themselves of really good ideas, and neither of them might be actual good ideas when they play out in the game, right? But now when we're like, hey, this is how we think of things, this is what we're leaning towards, these are the problems we see and how we want to solve them, then when you're talking with each other or giving us feedback, you know what we think. And so you're armed with that knowledge and can give us more intelligent, more thought-out feedback instead of just trying to guess what we're thinking, which isn't really effective for either group, I think.
I think it's very important that, you know, the line of communication is open, and
yeah.
I really, like, not just me, I guess everyone appreciates really, like, you know, like the campfire chats, like seeing the devs there and you talk about stuff, and, you know, as long as it's like some honest, open conversation, I think people are also like much more accepting of, you know, nerfs, or, you know, I guess everyone sees the ball lighting nerf coming at some point, right? It's just how it is.
I don't know what you're talking
Maybe
about.
not. It's just, as you explained, basically, right? You need to kind of keep it in line somewhat, and
yeah, but we're not going to surprise you with it. It's not going to come out of nowhere.
Exactly.
I think that's a big
so
part,
if you
right?
say in advance, okay, like, you know, we're gonna wait until, you know, whenever, and then, you know, expect a nerf or whatever.
Yeah.
Then people can like, you know, kind of like get in the mind set for it.
And I never expect everyone to fully agree either, right? That's impossible. Even if I come up with something or the player place does and we have a different reason or different way we want to go, like, I don't expect everybody to agree with what we do ever. That's not going to happen. But I just hope that we can understand each other. And he's like, you know what? I understand where Adam or the team or whatever is coming from. Even if I don't think it's the right choice, I see why they did it, and it kind of makes sense, right? Because,
Yeah, I have another question, and that is,
Sure.
like, in Season 3, you have, like, the leaderboards coming.
Mm-hmm.
So does that change, like, your perspective on, like, for example, mid-season changes and mid-season, like, adjustments to builds? Like, are you, like, prepared for this?
Yeah, we're preparing. We talk a lot about it. I think a little bit is going to be we're going to have learnings once we launch of, like, what's actually best. But it does mean, like we talked about before, like, we have to be very careful. And I think up front about when, especially, we're going to nerf things or builds, because especially when it comes to nerfing builds mid-season, we know that players kind of have to collect gear. And you make all those guides, and other people make guides and videos, and like, hey, do this, do this, do this, and everybody does it, and then we just like chop off the legs from under them. Like that would be terrible, right?
Yeah.
So that's why we have to let people know early and often. But there's some cases where we can't, but those I think are relatively rare. Like, for example, if a build or synergy is like crashing servers or something, like you have to, right? But that's extremely rare, I think. And most of the time it's like, oh, something's like really overpowered up here, then we'll try as much as we can to let people know far in advance so they can have time. Oh, okay, now I need to go get a different set of gear, or I have to think about the game differently because I know this isn't going to be around forever. And of course, abuse it while you can, right? Have fun. That's fine. You know?
I guess it also depends a bit on, like, how does actually this overpowered interaction come to be? Like,
Yeah.
is it just like baked in, like ball lightning right now, or is it like, okay, you have to do like exactly this one specific combo, like T-Wall's Will and
Yeah, a
combination,
lot of
right? This
things.
is like,
Yeah.
it's like, for example, T-Wall's Will is like this combo, like, okay, you unlock those two uniques and suddenly like 10 times more
Yeah.
powerful. This is like something way out of the ordinary and also not even accessible
Or
to
even
other
something that's
people,
very
right?
late in the season versus
Yeah,
something that's like
exactly.
from level 1. It does matter, yeah, of like how high priority things become to fix too. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Yeah, chat always says like they want major nerfs only in new season and stuff, and I guess that's kind of like where we're moving towards. I guess outside of those extreme scenarios, right? With
Yeah,
crashing
though that's a
servers.
good reset point I would say in general, yeah, for things.
Yeah. Okay, what else we got here, guys? Any more questions? I'm trying to scroll a bit. Ah, okay, that's a good point here about vampire powers.
Yeah, totally. I
So,
talked a lot about them this weekend. Sure.
yeah, I mean, also we saw this with Million Hearts, and now it's actually like coming back, like some of them at least. That's pretty cool, I think. And I guess you also like, do you use this as like kind of like some testing grounds? For example, like, yeah, we really want to make this cool new interaction possible, but we're not really quite sure if this fits in, and then you just make it as like a seasonal thing. Is that like actually like a thought process behind it? Or how do you
Absolutely,
go
yes.
about
That is the thought process.
Yeah.
It's by design, very much. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll talk about the way that we kind of do seasonal development now. We kind of think of things in 2 buckets. The first bucket is probably the more obvious one, is things that we know are going to stay in the game. Like new legendaries, new uniques, they go to the Eternal Realm, they're in the Seasonal Realm, and then we know they're going to be there forever. So we design them that way. The other bucket is the new seasonal stuff, right? Like for that's themed around the season. Like here, all the any vampire stuff would be in that other bucket, right? The vampiric powers. We call it Vamp Tide internally or Green Hell Tide. I like those names, but that all of these new features that come in, right? That's usually a little bit more experimental, a little bit more crazy, and by default, that is going to be ripped out. But we know when we experiment, there's a very high chance some things are going to really hit, some things are going to really miss. That's naturally what happens when you experiment, right? So we're very open. We know that going in that, hey, some things might hit, and we may want to bring those back either exactly the same or the spirit of it, like the good parts about it, into the regular game, right? And this is one thing I talk about a lot as a caveat with the Malignant Reigns, and going forward even. It's not always going to be exactly one-to-one of what is being brought back, because we have to bring it back in a way that is now healthy in the evergreen version of the game going forward, right?
Yeah.
And
Can't bring like a barber as it was.
yeah,
right?
or
It's
like Barbara's a pretty good example of like sometimes the thing that's attractive about the new season, we have to think about this, is like it's only the fact that the number was crazy big. If we bring it in and make the number reasonable, it's actually not fun anymore, and so we have to kind of pull apart in the design of something. Was it that the number was big, or is it that there's actually a cool design here, and then we bring it in, right? So we'll oftentimes be tweaking things, or even we can improve upon it because we've now had some time to test it with everybody, and we can make it even better when we bring it into the evergreen version. But it's very much a thing of like we're open to the idea that when we bring in seasonal stuff, and not just classes or powers or things, but anything, right? We get a lot of feedback on the Vamp Tide, right? For example, that people really like it. I think you can expect some version of the stuff that people love to come back in. When or how is up for debate because it depends. There's like a lot of back-end things we have to figure out of like, there's a difference of making something and knowing we're going to pull it out versus keeping it in forever a lot of the times, even just in the coding and stuff. But there's a good chance that we're probably going to bring back the stuff that people love because our ultimate goal is to make a fun game that people love, right? So if everybody loves something, kind of just makes sense, right? That's a slam dunk. For how rare we get slam dunk designs that are like easy and we know it's going to be 100%, that's rare. Like most of the things we make is like there's a pro and a con, and we have to decide like how do we make the pros outweigh the cons. That's normal, but if there's only pros, oh yeah, easy, slam dunk, get it in there. Yeah.
Okay,
Slam that
just
button.
a quick thing for chat, guys. Like, this is Adam Jackson. He's a lead class designer, so I don't think he can answer a lot of stuff about loot filters and like
yeah, more systems related
like,
things.
Let's go more with like class balancing. If you have any questions, this kind of stuff. So I just want to get that out there, guys. Like, no loot filter.
yeah.
I guess you can't really say anything. About this
No announcements there. I mean, we did some work in season 2 in a related realm with how
no
things
announcement
drop,
there. Usually sounds like at some point, guys. I guess. So I guess that's something to look forward to at least.
Yeah.
So. Okay. What else we got, guys? Oh yeah, that's like an interesting question. Lightning Imbue Rogue. I guess we talked about adding new skills and stuff. Are you also like, for example, thinking about like expanding the the arsenal, like for classes.
Like the elemental types that classes have
for
access
example, like
to
an
and
arcane
stuff.
sword, lightning, or fire rogue. Like I guess there's actually possibilities there, right? But I'm not sure if like
We've planted some seeds of ones that aren't really greatly supported yet. Like you have some themes of fire on barb, for example. There's not a fire barb yet, but we've put some stuff, right? Like Hellhammer and the berserking one that makes you explode fire damage.
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of like what I alluded to earlier of like, we start with the class fantasies being a little bit more rigid of like we want to keep these things so that when people approach the game and approach builds, they know what they're getting into. And you can't just mix everything everywhere all the time yet. But as we go on in the game, I think I can foresee us flexing a little bit, right? I'll give an example of where I think we went too far, actually, in the narrow class fantasy was, and Macro roasted me for this yesterday and does every day of the week he can when he gets feedback. But, like, Necromancers, we very intentionally made it that they're a little bit slower to get around than other classes, right? Like, the Rogues fantasy is very zippy, going around in combat, going around between places, they move. And even the Sorcerer to a degree, mostly because they have a legacy fantasy of teleport just going, right? But we didn't want every class to just zip around everywhere because then we have to balance the whole game around that, which is possible but harder. But also it makes everything feel samey. And so we want, and all the classes are intended to have certain pros and cons, and not everyone can just do everything really well. But even before we launched the game, we knew despite that, everyone does need to be able to perform at a minimum level of every category of the game to be effective, right? Like every class, for example, has to have a minimum amount of AoE. They have to have a minimum amount of move speed. They have to have a minimum amount of single target, a minimum amount of survivability. Now, some can have more than others of all of these things, but if you don't have the minimum, you just kind of fall off and feel bad. Like you can't do the game. And I think we went a little too far on the Necro, for example, of like, I was like, no, we're not going to have a teleport. But just because they don't have a teleport and can zip around doesn't mean they can't move faster and catch up to other classes all the time. So I think you can foresee, at some point in the future, us flexing a little more on that. That's the example we went too far. I'll give one that we almost went to if you want a fun one with before we launched the game, actually. The Druid, the Werewolf Druid, the original version, and I can openly admit this because it was my design, but their original Shred, the core skill, we wanted to see how far we could get to make the class fantasy really stand out. And we had this idea that, Werebear is, kind of AoE, a little bit more simple. You go around, pulverize, you blow up stuff. And then Werewolf was going to be your, like, super tactical single target, kind of like a rogue. Like, you zip around, you go to specific things and kill them really well. And original Shred, you would jump to an enemy and you claw them 3 times, and it was only one enemy you could ever hit at a time. It was pure single target.
Okay.
But it hit really hard. And had the synergy with the builder, the key passive. That's where that came from, of hitting multiple times and being rewarded, was because Shred only hit one thing, and Claw, they both just attacked really, really fast. So you just go through and mow through things, but pure single target.
Yeah, I guess
we
pure
tried
single
that.
Target is probably like
didn't work.
Yeah.
First of all, too many mobs too often, so it didn't feel good. But then also they just destroyed bosses.
And that was in the pre-density buff version of the game.
This was pre-density buff, yeah, and we learned that then. So I'm like, okay, we'll flex a little bit. We'll make stealth. You're gonna jump on. You're gonna claw 3 times, but it's like a very, very small AoE. Like you'll hit the enemy and the things next to it.
Yeah, I think Shred.
And
really
we actually almost launched with that. It was close. But then one of our designers really had this other fantasy, which is the version you see now, where it's like you build up different attacks that have different things going on, and you have this like 3-hit synergy. But you still dash and hit an enemy, but now you hit kind of everything on that 3rd hit. But even now, Werewolf is a little bit more single target centric than Werebear. But we had to bring up that minimum amount of AoE to make them viable in the game at all. And that's kind of an example of what I'm talking about. Like, everyone needs to be able to do stuff, but we do still want to have class fantasy and have some limitations, because if everyone can just do everything, it feels very samey. Like, you don't feel different going from one class to another. Like, why play a Sorcerer or a Necromancer or a Rogue when they all just feel the same? Like, they all just, like, do big circle AoEs or something like that, right? Like,
yeah, I can see that.
You're not going to have that texture to the classes and fantasies that you chase. And Diablo is a very fantasy-based game.
Yeah. But I mean, how do you go about, for example, like designing a power level of a skill? Like, for example, if you compare rogue skills, like someone mentioned Flurry in chat. Flurry is like extremely weak on single target. Has decent AoE, it's a fine skill, but especially single target is like a problem later, I feel. And it's like there's not many good ways of solving that right now. So, for example, I'm gonna like not outright just buff Flurry, but for example add more like single target scaling options. Like for example, you can do like poison, and that's almost about it. Especially when it comes to bosses. Or that is the Flurry RF build, right? There's like basically those 2 options on a rogue.
Yeah.
To solve single target damage. You have poison or you have RF, and that's it. And
I think actually I don't want to reference myself, but it goes back to what I was just talking about with that answer of like, if even within a build, not just a class, but a skill or a passive or a legendary or whatever, like if it doesn't hit the minimum bar,
Yeah, exactly.
then I think you can consider that like a failure on our part of like if Flurry is here for the single target and the minimum single target to be viable is here, then we need to do something to bring it up. Now, where we do it, that's like a very case by case basis, right? Like, do we do the core skill? Do we do the enhancement? Do we do the upgrades you can pick? Is it a passive? Is it a legendary? Is it unique? I think that's where the designers come in and like my team figures out like where's the best way to do it. Like, there's pros and cons to all of them too, which is what's interesting, right? Because a lot of times I think a lot of people and even designers, we think like, oh, just make it unique. Easy answer, just make it unique, right? But the problem is if you make it a unique, then one, you have to worry about the slot limitations of what exists there and the puzzle you can make. But two, that means it's only accessible in the late game. So like, what if the problem is early game? Or what if the problem is just like the skill itself isn't working, right? So it's something that we think a lot about, and we're definitely open to feedback on. Like when we find these cases, and please feel free to bring them up as a community, we're open to fixing them. I think that's like a failure where we've seen, that's like low-hanging fruit of like, hey, the easy way to make the game better, right?
Yeah.
Like, make Flurry single target better a little bit so
I always
catch up.
like, people always ask me like, okay, what should I play in a rogue? You know, I don't want to play Twisting Blades right now.
Yeah.
And I always have to explain to people, like, guys, just rogue is good, you know, like anything you do. But then it's like Flurry, and Flurry is kind of like the one thing where I feel like it falls off too much. It might be just the general problem.
That's where we can use feedback, right? Because even, you know,
so
we're not...
it's just one of those examples.
Yeah.
But
the feedback helps there.
Is there like maybe other plans to give people more customization with their skills? For example, I guess you also know PoE a lot. Yeah, so there's like these support skills. There's like, you know, bigger AoE, smaller AoE, but more damage, more projectiles. Like, this is also like really exciting stuff you can do.
Yeah.
And I think this is also something that maybe Diablo IV could benefit from. Is there like any kind of ideas like that in the room?
Yeah, I totally agree. I would say no guarantees of what or when or how we do things, but we're very open to the idea of like we want to make cooler stuff that's more modular, where like, you know, I'll use a simple example, like your projectiles return to you, right? That's like, it sounds really basic, but then you go, when the moment I say that, you're like, oh, what skills can I break with that? Like, how can I do things? Like, I love those kinds of designs. They're also really hard because we have to think of every permutation and, you know, the bugs and other things that can happen with that, the balancing that can happen with that. And then also like the performance of the game is something we have to consider as well, of like how we code these things, how we make them, because we don't want like, you know, they'll talk about like crashing servers with skills and stuff of, you know, when some skills can like do too many copies of themselves or permutations or things, it can just lag out the server and the game and things, and then we have to change it.
Now we already see that on world bosses, for example. Like,
yeah,
even just a few people and not only one boss. Like,
it's something that a lot of people, you know, like, it's not a problem until it is, but when it's a problem, like, you know, Blizzard has a history of we want our games to run on, you know, a lot of different machines and a lot of different types. So if we make really crazy visual awesome things but then you can't run it, like, it's actually a very big disservice to the player. So it's something that we have to constantly think about and keep in mind, even when we think about, you know, that's why we did a lot of work, you know, on our end of like having more monsters on the screen like we promised and things like that. That's not just a free thing on our end that we're like, oh yeah, well, obviously just plop in more monsters. Like, kind of, but we have to think about like, okay, well now you're attacking that many more targets, now your AoEs are ticking that many more times, and, you know, now we have to restructure it, and we do this a lot of like, we have to look at our skills under the hood and be like, hey, this one's like calling back to other effects too often. We need to find a way to more cleanly make it so that it doesn't do that, so that it's causing less lag.
Redesigning some of those skills. Like, have you done that already since launch, for example?
Yeah, we've gone under the hood and refactored, I think is a better way. We don't redesign of like we change how the skill works from your point of view, but like how it synergizes with other things under the hood, we're always updating and looking at, because we have to make it more clean and more efficient.
Yeah, I could imagine that.
Side of the job that not many people see, but
I guess we're gonna probably see a lot more of these cases actually when the Avatar of Zir comes, where, you know, we probably have like, you know, really tanky monsters.
Yeah, the monsters live longer, so now we have to consider.
It's exactly what
normally
happened.
They die, and so you don't worry about it. But when they don't die,
exactly, that's exactly what happened in D3 as well. A lot, like, you know, you just play the game, everything is fine, and then you do like high grade rifts, and, you know, you fight monsters for like 5 minutes. You have like 100 monsters on the screen, and yeah, suddenly the game breaks down, right?
Yeah, and it's an eternal struggle for every game, not just us. So you know, it's just a thing to consider.
Yeah, there was another good question in chat that I want to ask, which is about do you have any plans for like more support options? For example, you have shouts on the barb that are, you know, supportive. There's like, you know, some bunch of stuff on druids. is it like something you want to explore, you want to push a bit, or is it just something that just evolves and this is like a player thing?
I'd say we're really open to feedback on that now. We're a little bit torn on how we feel about it, because on the one side, I'll give you both sides, so I'll present the how we see it. On the one end, it's really cool to feel like you can like play with other people, support your friends, you get into a group and like you're contributing. Like I shout and all my friends and everybody around me gets strong. There's a really cool, good feeling about that, right? Even of the creation of incenses as an item that you can craft, that was kind of trying to get into that space where you can buff your friends. On the other side, we know that a lot of people like going through Diablo as kind of that solo experience and playing and like powering through on your own and making your character and things. And the more that we make these group things a thing that exists in the game, the more we kind of tell people, hey, the optimal way to play is to play in a group, because your shout is 4x more effective or whatever when you have more people around, right?
Yeah.
So it's that balance of like, and a lot of things. The rough part is that when we make something good, it suddenly becomes mandatory if it's best. And finding that line between a fun bonus and this is the best thing to do, you must do this now, is a really thin line a lot of the times. And so we're a little careful about, like, if we add too many of these multi-buff player synergy things, then everyone that plays solo is going to feel like, well, I'm so far behind, what's the point if running shouts and a bunch of other group buffs is the way to play now, because it's so much better. Kind of gets back to that triple defensive, triple shout thing of like, if it was just good and felt good, leave it alone, right? It's fine. But when it becomes mandatory and you feel like you're losing, then now we've got to think more about it, and it's a tougher nut to crack. So
yeah, for sure.
that's kind of how we feel about it. We're kind of I'm personally kind of torn on it, because like I see both sides, and having a resounding feedback one way or the other would be great, because that's like, okay, if people want it, sure.
Yeah, guys, you heard it, so we need the feedback.
Yeah, that's why we like
I
feedback.
guess also, like, if there's ever going to be Essence F mode, I guess it's also like not such a big concern anymore, and you can probably expand the design space a bit.
Yeah,
so
totally, right? So it just depends on how people want to consume the game, right?
Yeah. There's a question about they would love to ask if the visual effects have even more effects if the higher they get. Like rank 10 is better than 15. But I mean, that's already the case, right? You have like this
yeah, I want to
scaling,
say we do
graphical
have
effects.
a little bit of that in the game now. Like how much we expand on that and other things kind of goes back to that like game performance thing of like the more crazy we make the visuals, the less performant things get over time. So it's something we have to balance. But yeah.
Is there, okay, that's also a question I see that like, for the third time already. Something like about the puncture, or like just basic skills in general. Like, are you actually happy with people just, I mean, you explained, okay, there's builds that only use basic skills, there's builds that don't go for it at all. But the overall balance of basic skills is probably like more important, I guess. They seem like they have like all their theme, and some are just like clearly more useful than others. And it seems like something that, at least from my perspective, is like very neglected. So is that like something that you're also like looking into like in the near future?
Yeah.
To like make them more viable, like across all classes, for example, not just a rogue.
Yeah, I would say, well, are you talking about basics? There's two ways to think about it. Are you talking about basic skills compared to other basic skills, or basic skills on your bar at all compared to
I guess the
skills?
question here is more about comparing between these basic skills.
Yeah, compared to each other. I would say inherently in our design, we want all of our things to be competitive with one another. So when basic skills aren't competitive with other basic skills, we do want to try and make them more competitive. That is a goal I think that is pretty safe to say the team has. I will say we have already taken a few stabs at it. If you look at our patch notes, I remember talking with different people about, hey, we've done actually like reviews of the basic skills a few times.
Yeah, I've seen those.
It's really hard, but we do. We don't want anyone to be the best. And we also want them to be useful for a long time, so that you don't just drop off every single time like, oh, my basic skill kind of stinks because it doesn't do a ton of damage, so I'm just never going to use it again. But even compared to each other, yeah, like puncture being better than the other ones isn't intentional. It just means we got to make the other ones better. Yes. Would be my answer there.
And also like let's say for a build that doesn't like go all in on basic skills, like in the end game they really fall off.
Yeah.
In terms of like damage output, is that actually intentional? Is it just like supposed to be like some kind of filler skill? Because I don't know. I think it would be also nice if like your normal attack actually did something. It's besides giving you like a 2-second buff or something minor.
Yeah. So basic skills, the intent behind them is that we don't want them to completely overshadow core skills, at least early on. Because imagine, you log into D4 and your basic skill does the same damage as your core skill. Well, the core skill costs resource, the basic skill doesn't. Why do I use the core skill, right? Like that's an obvious problem that you have of why we don't want it to surpass early on. But later on in the game, I think we're pretty open to the idea of basic skills, like having a basic skill build and adding more support for it. I know there's some people on the team that are passionate about it, and I agree of like it'd be cool to explore that more. Our current design when we launched the game, we don't really have a ton of that right now. Was that we wanted to give basic skills, their role in kind of your character was the role of utility and not damage. Because if we make it damage, you run into that core skill problem of when you compare two things, one's better, you just do the better one. So instead, we added a lot of utility and other, or even buffs or synergies to your basic skill, and that was how we were trying to justify their use on your bar. To be honest, I don't think we've completely hit the mark yet on many of them. But that is kind of our design intent, and what I think you can expect us to go towards is we want you to feel good about having them. We think damage being the reason shouldn't be at least super early on, or shouldn't be the main reason. Like they still do a chunk of damage because early enemies are a lot weaker, right? But later on, like you said, they fall off. But adding scaling to them later on in some way, or adding very specific builds that like really use them a lot. Like I'll give you an example right now. My Uber Lilith build I'm using on my Upheaval Barb, I'm using Frenzy with the amulet that gives you more stacks, and Moonrise. And so my Frenzy is actually like a big source of my damage. My Upheavals are doing a little bit more, but Frenzy's like 80% of the Upheaval's damage, just DPS wise.
Nice.
So I'm actually having a lot of fun with it. I'm having a lot of ideas of basic skills and kind of our tuning and designs related to that. But
or just get a Shaco, you can +4 ranks for you. It's like the endgame scale.
Oh yeah, I'll just go get a Shaco. I'll just go get that real quick.
Yeah, I was asking earlier, but they didn't turn on the drop for me. I was finding some Duriels.
Well,
I got a grandfather actually early on stream, yeah.
Congratulations, nice. Well, I've got to get going now. I've got an interview, but it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys. Chat giving some people love.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I really appreciate all of you playing.
We're gonna see you later on the campfire, right? Are you there?
I won't be on the campfire actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But we're gonna see you again on another one.
Yeah. You'll see me in the future. I'm not going anywhere.
All right. I hear this all the love from chat, guys. So
yeah. Thank you so much. And have a happy BlizzCon. Thank you again for coming, Woody. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's super fun here, and thank you so much.